beginning of the third week, we're beginning to, it's that kind of thing where the kind of slight panic begins to emerge. At the beginning, when you start, you think you've got forever, and then you're suddenly now counting down the days. We've spent the last 2 weeks really examining the research, looking at what the show's going to be, look at what David's written so far, and developing characters that are kind of coming out of the actors themselves, and developing their stories within that. So really looking at creating material and creating sort of movement sequences that are character-based as well. And this is the week where we sort of go, right, what are all those separate elements? But what we've really tried to do, rather than kind of pick characters off the shelf and say, I was put into care when I was 12 and this happened to me and this happened to me and this happened to me, we're trying not to create that kind of a story around the characters. What we're trying to do with the actors is to create a feeling or a state of being in the world that is as a result of them being in care and of being care leavers and making decisions about who they are as a result of that. So it's a different way. Normally when you set up a character or you write a character, you create what's called the backstory, which often isn't shown on stage and doesn't exist, but is very helpful for the actor or the writer or the director. So you say, where did they go to school, when were they born, all of these things. I'm always quite cynical about that, because I think if the audience aren't going to know it, then why are we wasting time on it? Actually, why we go to the theatre is to watch characters in a moment reacting to other characters. So what we're trying to do is to create characters that are really active and really react in the moment. They're quite extreme. The first couple of weeks were quite emotional. Before we got onto the business of rehearsing the play. So the kind of discovery and research period has been quite fragile, really, because we're talking about people who are the same age as the cast, and it's quite shocking for them in the same way as it was quite shocking for me to find out the sort of resilience and the survival that some of these young people have got, and how their lives have been so different, and how we never really knew that. And we've spoken to some people, we've had some people in rehearsals, some care leavers who all have been through a very brilliant care home based in Edinburgh that I've made quite close connections with, that has a certain theory behind the way they work, which is about attachment, about allowing these young people to attach to an adult, which is the thing that's missing often from their lives, and the benefit of that. And these young people came in and talked to us, and I think that's probably the hardest bit, and I really questioned whether or not that was something that we should do. If we hadn't, our actors would always have asked about it, so I kind of had to do it. But it was the hardest bit when they were faced with real people saying, why do you want to do this? Why are you making this into a piece of theatre? And nobody's ever wanted to tell our story before, so it's really important that you do it properly. Thank you so much. And they left, and we were just, thrown by that. One of the things that kind of people talk a lot about are triggers. So a lot of these young people will have triggers that they won't necessarily know what they are, but there'll be certain triggers that will remind them of something traumatic or remind them of a particular episode in their lives. And it might be a smell, it might be a colour, it might be whatever. And these triggers sort of, as they're supposed to, trigger an emotion or a rush of adrenaline, a kind of fight or flight or something to do with that. So they will have a very strong, extreme reaction to something, and they won't necessarily be able to rationalise it. And part of sort of therapy that some of these young people get would be about very slowly beginning to unpick and work out what these triggers are, so that when they see the triggers they recognise them and then don't react in the same way. So it's about really being able to go into kind of real detail for these characters and create stories out of that detail. Very much part of this is about the actors having ownership over the work themselves, rather than us kind of imposing these ideas on them. So hopefully everything that will end up on stage is something that they feel, actually, we were really part of creating that. So it's about creating the right environment for them to feel confident for that to happen, and then, creating the right energy, so that people are excited and keep those ideas going. I mean, it's interesting because one of my first images of the show was loads and loads of young people on stage at the end, all with cups of tea. I don't know if that'll still be in it, but it was a thing about, which is what the title is about how many of these stories there are, and the kind of amount of this pressure in the lives of these young people to kind of survive. I think that's exactly the same. I think things start to open out more and you have more ideas and you have more people who have more ideas with you. So those sort of things start to become real. There's an interesting point before you go into rehearsals when it's kind of still just in your head, and I always have a kind of joke about, you know, it's all still potential at that point, and the second you go into rehearsal, in a way the potential's over, you're doing it now, and it will only, you know, the point is never to let it become less than that, let it to become more than that. So there's always that kind of drive in rehearsals, never to sit back and go, we're just rehearsing now. It's always to keep going. It's to go back to that moment when everything was possible. I don't think the fundamental kind of heart of the show has changed, because I think it felt really right about a practice flat and these young people crossing over from childhood to adulthood into it. The need to know what it all adds up to is greater now, and I haven't quite got to that yet, but I'm sure that'll happen, I hope.